Well, good morning again. It is good to be here again. And we were here in July. We had the conference, if you remember, the NLT Connect conference, very first one we ever did. And it was really great. And you guys were fantastic. I mean, you not only let us use the place, there was quite a few of you helping, and there was such a warm atmosphere. The people who came to join for that particular event were very surprised, warmly surprised at how enjoyable it was. And so it's a good chance we're aiming to have another one this September. So I've got to remember there's a screen there, haven't I? Okay. You can see there, small things are important. God has to remind us, doesn't he, again and again about lots of things in our lives, particularly with our walk with him. I mean, sheep, think of sheep. Always getting into trouble, walking out of the way and having to be booted back or shoved back or encouraged back into the way. And often we get distracted over small things. So the Lord's been speaking to me about this recently, and I thought I'd just share a bit about it. Thanks for allowing me to be here. It's just it's a privilege, and I, as I said before, it's not my happy place. But when the Lord puts responsibility on you, somehow you have to try and rise to it, don't you? And the thing is, if you ask him, he does. He helps you. He helps you. He helps me. Now, last time I was here, I shared a bit about the story of the woman who had the issue of blood and touched the hem of Jesus' clothes. That was 7 years ago, so I'm not expecting any of you to remember that, don't worry. It's not a test. But I thought I'd start there, because there's a lot of overlap in this. So I'll just read, it's Mark 5, 25 to 34. A certain woman had a flow of blood for 12 years and suffered many things from many physicians. She had spent all that she had and was no better, but rather grew worse. When she heard about Jesus, she came behind him in the crowd. In some of the other translations, it says she had to push her way through. It was hard to get to him. For she said, "If only I may touch his clothes, I shall be made well." And immediately the fountain of her blood was dried up, and she felt in her body that she was healed of the affliction. And Jesus, immediately knowing in himself that power had gone out of him, turned around in the crowd and said, "Who touched my clothes?" So Jesus knew immediately that something significant had happened in somebody's life close to him, but he was all surrounded by a crowd and he couldn't tell who it was. You might say, well, he was God, wasn't he? So why didn't he know? But the reality, he was a man, and he did have some of man's limitations. And his disciples said to him, "You see the multitude thronging you, and you say, 'Who touched me?' And he looked around to see her who had done this thing. But the woman, fearing and trembling, knowing what had happened to her, came and fell down before him and told him the whole truth." So it was actually her who revealed herself, and that was a very difficult thing for her to do, because she was not allowed to be amongst people. Her affliction meant she wasn't even supposed to be anywhere near anybody else. She was supposed to be isolated. But she was afraid, and she knew that God had done something in her life. And he said to her, "Daughter, your faith has made you well. Go in peace and be healed of your affliction." So I reflected last time on the need for each of us to have a personal encounter with Jesus. There's nothing else that can change our hearts and make us into people that God is able to use without an encounter with him. That point in your life where you realize that I need to be yours, Lord, and it's a nailing the colours to the mast. I can remember when I did it. I was 22. I'd known about Christianity of this sort, proper Christianity, for about 4 years, and I knew it was true. And I spent 4 years struggling with the realization, with the acknowledgement that if to become a Christian meant laying down my own life, giving up my rights to myself. And it took me 4 years to get to that point, and I did. I got to that point. God very faithfully brought me to it through a guy who was. See, I haven't done this, look. There you go, you need that one. He was part of a youth group that my wife, who wasn't my wife then, went to, and she'd taken me along, and I was telling him, he said, "Well, where are you in all this?" He said, and I explained, and he said, "You're a man, aren't you?" You're an adult, you're grown up. You know what's right. You just need to get on and do it, don't you? And I thought to myself, actually, I just need to get on and do it. I just need to yield myself to this one who's revealed himself to me and accept that that's the right thing to do. Anyway, this woman, she was isolated, probably abandoned by any husband she may have had. She'd used up her own resources. She was continuously ill. She was not allowed near other people. She'd been abused, even by those who should have helped her. She was desperate, and her life was on hold. She'd heard about Jesus and his work among the sick, and I would imagine she believed that this was her last, or he was her last and only hope. She had to push her way through into Jesus' presence, but she didn't want even to be noticed. She felt unworthy to do more than try and touch Jesus' clothing. But Jesus knew immediately when she touched him, and he stopped in his tracks, and he insisted on locating the lady who he knew had been changed. The lady herself found she'd been interrupted by another life issue, Jesus going to help Jairus' daughter, and she was terrified of what she'd done. But Jesus gave her his personal assurance that she was a daughter of Abraham, that she'd been made well, and she could go in peace. So she was healed again. She was healed, and she could begin to live again, knowing that she had encountered someone who transformed her physical life and her understanding of who she was. She was no longer an outcast. She was a daughter of Abraham, part of the family. She was now well and could enjoy all the little things that make up life, but in a new light and with other people. Maybe she was accepted again by her neighbours and family, and able to share with them this new and very personal appreciation of God's kindness and mercy and the work of the man Jesus in her life. And I'm hoping there's lots of us here who have known that change in our hearts that comes when we've encountered Jesus, encountered him. It's not enough to know about him. There's lots of people who know about Jesus. But when you have a personal encounter with Jesus, it changes everything. Now, this is very much the experience, this woman's experience of isolation and being an outcast, very much the experience and journey of many of our leprosy patients. And they go through this process of being isolated, of being outcast, of being not able to mix with other people, often losing their family, often losing their spouse even, losing their community connection. And over the years, many of them damaged by leprosy have finally arrived at our hospital, often after desperate experiences of other people's failure to help them as they should have done, suffering terribly from the stigma of leprosy and the implications it has for the rest of their lives, knowing ostracism by family, by friends, by community, effectively alive but dead. And this is underlined in their minds by their religion, which says they deserve it all due to past misdeeds. And add to that the horror that the damage that may already be present in their bodies cannot be undone, and leprosy has stamped its mark on their lives. And just very quickly, the lady you can see there in pink, she's called Shova. Her little girl on her right is Anushka. The boy on her left is Anis. And I met them when I was there just in February this year. And she's very low caste, and she was married to a man who was higher caste but loved her. He'd like forsaken his caste to marry her. They're not Christians, this is a Hindu. She's a very sweet girl. And had these 2 children. And he died unexpectedly of a heart attack. And so suddenly she was, her husband's family wanted absolutely nothing whatever to do with her. And then she found she had leprosy. And so she then came into contact with NLT, and NLT has been helping her. In the meantime, she's met this young man. This young man rather is watching her from afar. They were living not far apart, and he was so admiring of the way she was with her children and how she was looking after them and just how gentle she was. He became friends with her, and now they're getting married. So that's a kind of happy story. Now at Lalgard, that didn't work. At Lalgard, they find a new mindset. Different world that includes healing, compassion, and a willingness to care. They find hope from our staff and from others affected by leprosy who've started the road to a better place already. Much of the positive change that comes to them over time is a result of the myriad small things that they experience in the environment of Lalgard. Physical contact after so much avoidance. You can see there's a nurse with that girl. That girl's had leprosy for a long time. It's done a lot of damage to her. You see Mike there with Harkaman. Harkaman is an old friend of Mike and Mike and Mike. So 3 Mikes in NLT. We got a little one. I'm sort of middle Mike, and then we got big Mike. And Harkaman was patient number 13. He arrived at Lalgard when it was still being built. So we're talking 35 years ago, about 35 years ago, 34 years ago, with all that he had in the world on his head in a little bundle, pretty much. And he said, I've heard that you help people with leprosy. And he was already a mess, tremendously independent man. He's a lovely Christian man now. The myriad small things. Regular encouragements to keep looking after anaesthetic extremities. I was talking earlier on about anaesthetic hands and feet. Huge problem. Huge problem to live a physical life in a hard environment when you can't feel anything. You damage yourself, and you damage yourself, and you damage yourself. And then bits of you start breaking off and get eaten. You can wake up in the morning if you lost a finger because something's eaten it in the night. Literally. But they also find there's this kind of there's listening ears from nursing staff. There's time and conversation with others on the same journey. A big thing is other people in hospital at the same time, other leprosy patients who've discovering this change, this difference, the fragile emergence of new hope and the discovery of a different God that says they're still valuable despite all the damage, decay, and loss that's happened in their lives. Now, I'm thinking this morning about small everyday things that press in on our own lives. Okay, we're surrounded by little things in our activities, in our connections with other people, and sometimes these little things matter a lot to other people, but can easily become irritating or be overlooked or even despised by ourselves as we dwell on the bigger things that we'd like to do. And so it was sparked off, these thoughts, by the verses in Matthew 25. So Matthew 25, 31 to 40. I won't read it, I'll paraphrase it. Son of Man comes in his glory. Holy angels, he's on his throne. Nations are gathered. And he starts to separate one from another, like a shepherd dividing his sheep from the goats. Sheep on one side, goats on the other. And the king says to those on his right hand, Come, you blessed of my Father, inherit the kingdom prepared for you from the foundation of the world. I was hungry, you fed me. Thirsty, and you gave me drink. Stranger, and you took me in. It's a good thing to take people in, isn't it? I was naked, and you clothed me. I was sick, and you visited me. In prison, and you came to me. And the righteous ones, they say, well, when did we see all that? When did we see that? And he says, Assuredly, I say to you, inasmuch as you did it to one of these, the least of my brethren, you did it to me. And it was that verse 40, that captured my attention. Inasmuch as you did it to one of the least of these, my brethren, you did it to me. The acts themselves were small things. Food, a visit, some clothes. They were done without any thought of their inherent heavenly value. And yet the Lord says they were so precious to him that it was as if he had been the beneficiary. And in this story, there's this sense of genuine astonishment on the part of the people that these kindnesses, they weren't even really thinking about. They were just kind of normal. Merited a reward that they'd never once thought about. Our lives are full of small things, small opportunities to be kind, to share time, to visit someone, to listen to someone's worries, to help with people's difficulties in small ways, to use particular skills, perhaps repetitively, perhaps sometimes feeling taken for granted, to do boring tasks without complaining, and to choose not to be irritated in testing circumstances. It can feel as if we're being overwhelmed sometimes by this small stuff, and that it's getting in the way of important things. And there can be big things that we need to get done. But I think how we handle the small stuff, how we handle it really matters. And I think it relates to friends, it relates to neighbours, it relates to families, brothers, sisters at church, our spouse if we have one, our workplace, and even the people we don't know who come across our paths most days. These small interactions become the warp and the weft of the tapestry that God's weaving into our lives. And our right handling of them become the pinpricks of light by which God reveals himself to a needy world. Inasmuch as you did one of these little, seemingly insignificant tasks to one of the least of these people, you did it to me, and I'm pleased with you. So don't quickly shove the insignificant stuff out of the way to make more space for the big things. The little things are often the key tests of our character. So how you react to small things is often a really important test of where you're at in your walk with the Lord, in your life, in your thinking, generally. And sometimes we can completely miss the point and not even notice the test. So, next one. That's a picture of Lalgard, looking very lovely. Particularly after the monsoon, it does look lovely when the flowers come out. And the founder of NLT, Eileen Lodge, she really wanted it to be a place that showed something of God's glory and goodness, so that when you walk into it, it's just different to all the dust and desolation around. And 30 years later, the staff still work quite hard to keep it looking nice. Our leprosy patients come into this lovely environment, and they're treated with kindness and compassion. During their time there, they're presented with a different worldview to the harsh one they've known, populated by lots of small revelations of love. For some of our patients, it brought them into relationship with the God of love himself, as they found the one behind the difference. Others acknowledge the new worldview, and it changes them even if they haven't come to know the Lord yet. The inherent kingdom values in our work have fueled the very successful community activity that NLT is engaged with, changing the way that people in incredibly poor communities view leprosy, live together, and support each other. So the values themselves, our kingdom values of care, compassion, things in this country that we've taken for granted for years, and we're on the edge of seeing them start to slip away at a national level, as God is relegated more and more to the sidelines and being treated as irrelevant by those in authority. And we need, as churches, we need to really hold on to these things and really present the fact that these values matter. Family matters, care matters, compassion matters, how we treat our old people, how we treat our unborn. The vulnerable in our society at every level is such a big thing and a big measure of who we are. But I have to say that this work is really hard. At Lalgard, it's really hard, and our staff are facing difficult circumstances. We heard about the guy in Chad there talking about the heat, and it gets very hot in Nepal. It could be 40 in the summer in Nepal. They're still having to meet with hundreds of patients every day. We have up to 100,000 visits a year from people. And thousands of those, probably 10,000 or so of those, will be people affected by leprosy. Infrastructure doesn't work very well. Transport's dangerous. Anyway. Now, just before this parable, the parable of the story, rather, of the king. Yes, the parable of the king judging the nations. There's the parable of the talents. Right, we all know the parable of the talents really well. 3 servants given money to look after while the boss goes on some travels. This is Matthew 25, 14 to 30. One gets 5, one gets 2, one gets 1. And according to their abilities, it says, the 5 and the 2 talent servants work hard. They do something with their talent, and they did well. The 1 talent servant didn't do anything with his talent. He just kept it hidden so that he could give it back to the master on his return. And reading between the lines, one might think that he rather despised his talent. He might have been resentful that he wasn't considered a 2-talent or a 5-talent servant. I don't know if sometimes if you can feel like that, we're given tasks and you're given something a little bit menial, think, I could do a lot better than that. That's not fair. Why is he getting all the good jobs and I'm getting the rubbish job? But actually, that isn't the point. The point is what we do with what we get. And maybe it was that annoyance as well as a fear of failure that made him choose not to bother to use his measly talent to get something more for his master. He knew the master would want him to use it, but he didn't. And he was a disappointment. By contrast, the other two servants were blessed and praised. So we have different responsibilities, we have different abilities and skills in church life, in life in general. Some of those are tedious and unglamorous, but they're important nonetheless. And how we do them matters. And I think it delights God's heart when we serve in the simple and boring stuff with a cheerful and uncomplaining spirit. Jesus said in Matthew 22:28, the Son of Man didn't come to be served, but to serve, to give his life a ransom for many. Peter talks about being hospitable without grumbling. Paul in Galatians talks about, he says, let us not be weary with doing good, for we shall reap in due season if we don't lose heart. Reaping is not just a blessing for ourselves, but as we become those little shafts of light that reveal God's love, he can draw other hearts to him. Our actions are the simple outflow that results from our love for Jesus. And the best bit is that God does bless us and we find his love and life quietly growing in us. And I'm sure that's true for most of us. If we've got on with our lives and been, as it were, happy doing the thing that God gives us to do, God somehow enlarges that. I know he has in my heart. I find I'm a lot more compassionate perhaps than I was. It's not just understanding myself or understanding other people. It's because God actually grows your heart. I was talking about skin earlier on. The miracle of skin is that skin's rising all the time. And all the surface stuff is coming off all the time. And then the stuff underneath keeps coming up and keeps coming up. And skin's very complicated. But in the midst of all that, there's this principle that it's constantly renewing itself. And we can quickly and easily become quite jaded in our Christian thinking and living, unless we're allowing God to keep filling us, keep coming in, keep filling up the fountain so that it can keep flowing out and be an encouragement. I was, in our prayer letter this month, we chose the Lord's my shepherd. I've probably missed a slide. Which one's this? You grow weary while doing it. Just to say, this guy here, Sanjeev, in the dark there, he went to India for a month and he came back with acute depression. Nobody knows what happened. And our team were working a little part of the community. He's got leprosy. His mum's got leprosy. And I don't think it's the leprosy that's given him depression, but he's just been stuck in his bed, not able to do anything. And our team, the lady you can see in white on the other picture there, saw this guy and thought, we've got to help this guy. And so she's taken him to a specialist in psychiatric stuff, and he's now on a road to helping out. There's more about the story anyway I can mention after lunch, but just to say that I visited this guy, and you just kind of think, wow, the house they live in is just tiny. I mean, I had to almost bend double to get through the door. There's no lights, there's no windows in it. He's in pitch dark, which probably isn't helping him very much. There's a little candle burning, and there's a family of 6 living in that. I don't know where they all sleep. But what happens to your heart when you're in situations like that? How do we deal with that? What does God move in you when you see that? And that's a big thing. So Psalm 23, which is, I think, this. There we go. The Lord's my shepherd. I shall not want. He makes me lie down in green pastures. He leads me beside the still waters, and he restores my soul. He leads me in the paths of righteousness for his name's sake. And I hadn't thought much before about the fact that David obviously was a shepherd, but that was his main experience. David, from a little boy, had basically been looking after his sheep. And that was all he knew. And we know from his conversation with King Saul before he fought Goliath that he protected his sheep with his life in the face of danger. Lions and bears, and he was dedicated to his sheep. He probably knew them individually by name, by sight, probably personality as well. No, he probably didn't name his sheep actually, but he probably knew them by sight, and he probably knew them by personality. I think shepherds do get to know their sheep well in those days anyway. And every day he'd have searched out good pasture, good water, and places where his flock could rest and flourish. He must have spent a lot of time on his own with the sheep. And it would be easy to feel sorry for that narrow, limited life. And yet in his time, he was discovering his gift with music and song, and somehow experiencing God's goodness and care. He developed a personal relationship with God and became confident in God's faithfulness and ability to keep him. And he most likely wrote that psalm during this time, when he came to know God as the very best shepherd who could nurture him, guide him, and take him through everything that life might bring, all the way home to God's own heavenly house. David carried out his humble duties faithfully, devotedly, and God loved him for it. He was known by God as a man after God's own heart. He made his mistakes, but that shepherd heart guided much of his life, even as a king, and God honoured it. John 10, Jesus describes himself as the good shepherd who knows his sheep, and he's known by his own. Jesus is the good shepherd. He's the one about whom David was writing, and we need to know his voice. We need to have that encounter with Jesus that makes us one of his sheep. And we can discover day by day what a faithful shepherd he is. There needs to be something of the shepherd heart in all of us as we care for those that God brings into our lives. And the values that shine in NLT's work in Nepal were instilled into NLT by Eileen Lodge. She was the founder. It sprang from the shepherd heart that God put in her. And at her funeral, it was amazing to hear story after story after story of the countless small acts of love she had given to so many people and the way that it affected their lives to draw them to God. I'm grateful these values have stayed strong in our brothers and sisters at Lal Garden. They have, haven't they? They really have. There's just bucketfuls of compassion and love. And the community team, interestingly, the community team are mainly not Christian. There is a Christian amongst them, and the manager was a Christian. There's a new manager now. But the point is, they've discovered something. They've discovered that the kingdom values that they take out into the community and that they work with actually change communities. The communities that we're working with, and we've worked on probably nearly 30 different Dalit villages in the last nearly 20 years. And those villages are transformed. They're completely different places, the communities they've been working amongst. And there's a couple of them that have now got little churches in, where the values that were being brought to them were so perplexing that the people went on to discover what was this about for themselves. Not just being told, they were discovering for themselves. And our staff have realised that there's the reward they get. I mean, they work in really difficult circumstances. The reward they get personally from being part of this work really shows. They talk about it. And so that was very interesting to me. And I had some of the Hindu staff were saying to me, we were a bit worried because some of our senior managers now, are we going to keep Christian managers going? Because we don't want this place to lose this ethos. We don't want to lose this that we've got. So this is Hindu staff worrying that our organisation may become less and less Christian. Isn't that interesting? Because of the power of all these lives, the Christian brothers and sisters and the lives, the acts of kindness, the acts of love and the way it changes people's lives are so clear. And they've compared it with other work in Nepal. And they've realised that that's the difference. Okay, we're limited in our ability and freedom to proclaim the gospel in Nepal, and yet the kingdom values inherent in our work change things. So in our own lives, we can know his shepherd voice prompting us to be a blessing. And I always remember the words of a man called Norman Mays. So Norman Mays, he was a nobody in the Christian world, nobody, but he came to the Lord, and he was blessed with the gospel ministry. He was an interesting man. I love listening to him. He was just full of the joy of the Lord, but he was a school cleaner. So he was a very humble kind of role. He was a very humble man. And the Queen visited his school one day, and she had a chat with the staff, and she said to him, "You've polished these floors wonderfully well. Wonderfully well." And he said, "Yes, Your Highness." He says, "I do it for the king." And she smiled, and she acknowledged the truth of it as one who knew exactly what he meant. She knew what he was talking about exactly, because she loved the Lord, of course, as well. So she knew exactly what he was saying. A friend of mine, a guy that I like reading, A.W. Tozer, said that what comes into our minds when we think about God is the most important thing about us. It shapes our identities and our actions. Okay, so what you think about when you think of God, you know, is he your shepherd? Is he the one who's plucked you out of sin and loss and damage? You know, maybe for some of us it was like one of these people affected by leprosy. Their lives were in a bad way, and God came and made significant changes. Or do you see him as somebody harsh? Do you see him as a rule maker? How we see God really matters. Really matters. And the more I've gone on, the more I've realized God is so kind and gracious to us, so patient with us, so determined to make our hearts like his, that shepherd heart that he so appreciated in King David. You know, he said, "This is a man after my own heart." And Jesus said there's two main commandments, aren't there? To love your God with all your heart, your soul, your mind, and your strength, and to love your neighbour as yourself. It's great to see how you are loving people in other countries who are in difficult places. You know, my focus, we've got a big focus in our church in Africa, and a big focus, there's obviously a bit of a focus in Nepal. We have some European stuff as well, but it's so healthy for a church to be looking out as well as looking around. But we want to be involved in our communities as well, don't we? Thinking of John 13, I'm finishing here. Jesus, knowing the Father, had given all things into his hands. So Jesus, knowing the Father, had given all things into his hands. That's a big thing to know, isn't it? Began to wash the disciples' feet. Okay. Jesus, knowing all things, the Father giving him all things in his hands, began to wash the disciples' feet. This was not Oswald Chambers made the comment. It was a mundane and humble but very loving act. And it showed his servant heart. It sets the example for us. And Oswald Chambers said of this picture, it takes God incarnate to wash feet properly. It takes God incarnate to do anything properly. You know, whether it's polishing floors, whether it's mending people broken by leprosy, or broken by anything else. We're all broken people, and God's had to mend all of us. And so I suppose back where I started is sorry if there's another slide or not. I'm hopeless at moving slides forward when I'm speaking like this. I'm just sorry about that, I really am. But just to finish where we started, don't be irritated by the small things in your lives, but persevere in allowing God to work out his love in all of them, and to know that he treasures every one of them, all those small acts. Inasmuch as you did one of these little things to one of these, the least of my brethren, you did it to me. And know that he treasures every one of them, and he'll bring blessing to you and others through them. And I guess that was what I wanted to bring. I'm sorry if it got a little bit lost in translation, but I'm not very good at being up here and holding thoughts together. But, you know, God is that kind of a God. I'm trying to present him as a God who cares about the little things in your lives, but he wants you to care about the little things in other people's lives as well. And those little things that just touch people's lives with God's love and his kindness, yeah? So, thanks ever so much.